Welcome to the Stressless Eating Podcast, where we help diet-obsessed and food-crazed women break themselves out of the food and body prison, end the dieting madness, and take control of their health for good. I'm your host, Leanne Ellington, and this podcast is about answering one question. How can you heal your relationship with food and your body and take a practical approach to this whole self-love journey, but without all that restriction, obsession, and shame, and without needing years of therapy to do so? If you want to know the answer, you're in the right place. All this information is 100% free, so please subscribe to and review our podcast. Hello, and welcome back to the Stressless Eating Podcast. And a little bit of an interesting circumstance. It is absolutely pouring rain here in Nashville, so the show must go on. So we're going to try and edit out some of the noise in the background of the rain, but hopefully maybe it soothes you a little bit. But as you can see, the title of today's episode is "The Statistics Don't Lie" and how disordered eating is spreading like a wildfire. And here's the thing, I was never technically diagnosed with an actual eating disorder. You know, when I was younger, I definitely noticed that I was bigger than the other girls my age. And yeah, it was clear that based on my growing size and weight, that something was going on within me in the food department. But other than putting me on diets or telling me to be careful about what I was eating and inviting me time and time again to just eat less or watch what I ate, I kind of fell through the cracks. And I'm finding that the same patterns that were happening back then are even worse today. And nowadays, where studies show that while less than 1% of American women suffer from anorexia, and less than 1.5% of women suffer from bulimia, the two most common eating disorders that you hear about, studies show that 75% of American women suffer with disordered eating. So, let me say that again. 3/4 of the women in America suffer from disordered eating. And we're going to talk about what that is because I had never heard of it for many, many years of my life. And I find that most women haven't either. And keep in mind that these studies that I reference only include Americans, but we also know that disordered eating is a worldwide epidemic. And, you know, here's the reality. While pretty much every woman knows what an eating disorder is, most have never even heard of this thing called disordered eating. Like I said, I sure hadn't for so many years. And so considering that 75% of women suffer from it, I think it's really important to know about it. And even more important that we talk about it. So let's talk about it. All right. So according to the National Eating Disorders Association, here's what disordered eating is. It describes it as signs and symptoms of disordered eating may include, but are not limited to, frequent dieting, anxiety associated with specific foods or meal skipping, preoccupation with food, weight, and body image that negatively impacts quality of life, a feeling of loss of control around food, including compulsive eating habits. Disordered eating includes behaviors such as chronic restrained eating, compulsive eating, binge eating with associated loss of control, irregular chaotic eating patterns, ignoring physical feelings of hunger and satiety or fullness, the use of diet pills, emotional eating, night eating, and secretive eating. In other words, disordered eating is everything that we talk about here on this podcast. And I refer to it, more generally as the diet mentality or the weight loss mentality. But I truly believe that disordered eating has a cause. In fact, I actually believe that the cause and the effect of disordered eating is the diet mentality. Like, diet mentality is causing disordered eating, and disordered eating is the symptom of the diet mentality. And so let's talk about the cause. Well, the cause, in my opinion, is that there's this mindset that there are good foods and there are bad foods. And there's a thought process of, eat less, move more if you want to be healthy, or, constantly just focusing on your scale weight, your jean size, a calorie count, or doing anything to move that scale or drop a few pounds, even if it means sacrificing your health or your happiness. And let's be honest, a lot of people are doing a lot of unhealthy things in favor of that scale moving. constantly counting calories or carbs or fat or grams of protein or whatever it is, just that obsession, and just always thinking about food, controlling yourself around food, or just feeling out of control around food. And so the effect of all of this, it ends up giving you this extremely disordered relationship with food. And so if you're anything like myself and all of my clients, you've been learning that way of thinking for a long time. Like, you learned it just like I learned it. And unfortunately, first of all, that's being given to us as health. Like, people are telling us, if you want to be healthy, you just need to eat less, move more, count, track, weigh, measure, all that. But unfortunately, the women's health world, I feel like it's letting you down. It's just throwing more and more diets and short-term fixes at you. And it's giving you endless ways to lose weight or get results in the short run. But it's actually wiring your brain for failure in the long run. And it's really just giving you only part of the story, like telling you that it's a food problem or a body problem or a motivation or willpower problem. And let's be honest, there's a major cost to this, because not only are the majority of women on this planet still feeling overweight or unhealthy and more uncomfortable in their bodies, but they're still also not able to create consistent, sustainable, or permanent results with their health. And in turn, we as, in general, as women, we're getting unhealthier and unhappier and even more confused. And living on this roller coaster day in, day out, that feels like the definition of insanity. And let's face it leaves any woman, the strongest woman, leaves her to feel weakened, disempowered, hopeless, and just fearful that this is the new normal. Not to mention all of that shame and blame and guilt and comparisonitis and self-rejection that comes alongside of it, right? But here's the thing, ladies, it doesn't have to be this way, right? Just like you learned this way of thinking, you can go unlearn it and you can go learn something new, because you shouldn't have to live like this. Like, you don't have to stay locked inside of food and body and diet prison your entire life. And you shouldn't have to sacrifice your health for your happiness or your happiness for your health ever again, because the way that you think about food, not food itself, the way that you think about food, that will either keep you locked in a food prison or it will become the key that sets you free. But first, and I mean this with so much love, and I hope you take it with nothing less than love, you've got to get really friggin' real with yourself about what's not working. And if I can just invite you into a possibility, it's the diet mentality that's not working. That is the cause of the disorder. That is the prison, and that is the problem, and that is that never-ending roller coaster, because you can't ever get off of it. Or if you do, you become terrified that you're going to go off the deep end and gain a bunch of weight, right? We all know what it's like to feel really just stuck on that roller coaster. It's kind of like, the devil that you know versus the devil that you don't know. So I want you to ask yourself, as you're thinking about what we're about to talk about on this episode, do you really need another diet or quick fix or short-term food solution, right? Do you really want to contribute to the disorder that's present in your relationship with food? And do you really want to continue down this definition of insanity, or are you ready to get off that roller coaster? Because until you get really real about those questions, sadly, and statistics prove this time and time again, you're gonna stay stuck in the dieting madness. And I want so much more for you than that. Life is too short to be living like this. And I'm guessing, if you're listening to this podcast, you want more for yourself too. So that's what we're gonna talk about on today's episode. And I'm a big believer in getting to root causes and addressing the true problem rather than just dealing with the symptoms or the effects. And so we're going to take a look at the cause that is continually moving women into disordered eating and causing them to feel stuck in that vicious cycle rather than taking the time to heal it, right? And so we're going to talk about what you really need to do to heal it. Okay, so I want you to understand what's actually causing the disorder, but also what's standing in your way from healing it so that you have those awarenesses ingrained in your brain and you can see it all as it's showing up. Because the truth is, yes, awareness is everything, but I also want you to start having more compassion for yourself. And it's really, really hard to have compassion for something that we don't fully understand. And so I found that once again, when women understand why they do what they do, then they can practice compassion towards themselves. So hopefully you're ready for less judgment and a lot more love and understanding and compassion. And that way we can go get really clear on what's standing in your way. And so I laid out the top 10 weapons, and I'm calling them weapons because a lot of things can be tools, but like we've talked about on this podcast, most people are using them as weapons against ourselves. And so I've laid out the top 10 weapons that are sabotaging your health, first of all, but that's really what's keeping you stuck in the disordered eating patterns. And remember, transformation starts with awareness because only then can you go do something about it. It's got to start with awareness. So we're going to break down all of those top 10 weapons on this episode, starting with the first one, which is stress. And when I say weapons, let me refresh and reframe. These are the top 10 causes. Like, okay, before we can talk about healing the disordered eating, what's causing it, right? So the first cause is stress. And I'm really talking about nervous system and brain stress. And so, yeah, stress is this inevitable thing in our lives, but we can either work with it or work against it. And so especially with the crazy amount of commitments and influences and messages and opportunities being thrown at us every single day, it's so easy to become overwhelmed or burdened by it all. And so you aren't always going to be able to control or predict all of your incoming stressors. But the good news is there's some that you can, because first of all, stress has a response. It's a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and it's a chemical response. We talk about it in the Tale of Two Cookies, right? What you experience on the inside majorly impacts everything external to you, but also internal. So your thoughts create a neural response in your hormones, in your gastrointestinal system, in your endocrine system, your respiratory system, every system of systems in your body. And that's where the health and fitness world misses the mark because, grilled chicken and broccoli and steamed rice, it sounds great when you're in the bubble, when you're on that okay, I'm going to start over again on Monday bubble. And, when you're gung-ho and pumped up. But what happens when you're stressed or anxious, right? No one ever gave me the tools to deal with the stuff that was getting in the way of me stress eating or saying, okay, forget about it, screw it, let's go order pizza, right? And so obviously we talk about that a lot on this podcast. So I'll just leave it at that for now. But just know the bottom line is if you don't own your stress and your stresses and the way that you manage stress and the way you think about it, it will own you. So that's cause number one. The second cause is reaction. So where are you living in reaction? And so here's how I know that I'm reacting to my life instead of responding to it, instead of slowing down and mindfully responding. When I feel like my life owns me more than I own it, when I have this awareness that I'm spending more of my time and my energy and my focus or my money or my attention on putting out those metaphorical fires in my life, and I never seem to get them out or keep them out, right? And so when in reality, I'm never getting to the stuff that matters to me, to the parts of my brain that are going to help me thrive. I'm always stuck in that survive mode, trying to keep my head above water. That's how I know I'm reacting, right? And so if I'm stuck cleaning up those messes and I never fully get caught up, again, I'm stuck in that survival mode. Things only change for me when I address the root of the problem and the source or the cause of the fires. And so it's literally the difference between feeling like you're just always putting out fires every time they pop up in your life, and it's that never-ending battle, versus addressing the cause of the actual fires and preventing them from starting back up in the first place, right? It's a totally different mindset and a totally different set of actions, but one entails beginning with the end in mind, to actually address things so that you're not living in this reactive state and this reactive mode, feeling like a chicken with her head cut off all the time, right? And, doesn't it really, when you think about it, just make more sense to slow down, assess the cause, and then respond, mindfully and calmly to create a solution? rather than staying inside that battle upstairs between your logical brain and your emotional brain when you're in reactive mode. Like, living your life in reaction is the epitome of living on that hamster wheel or feeling like you're stuck inside Groundhog's Day, right? Only you can decide that it's time to get off. And so again, the number two cause that we're talking about here, and really it's a chicken egg, it's keeping you stuck in the disordered eating, is, are you always reacting? But that includes like knee-jerk reactions to your emotions and using food to address it, or I should say never really addressing it, right? That's a reaction, right? Feeling out of control of your emotions, that's being reactive, right? So that is our second cause. Our third cause is control, okay? So I want to address this one right away because it is often kind of misillusioned. Is that a word? It is now, right? People get misguided about this word is what I'm trying to say. And you all know I make up words sometimes, but I often hear women say all the time, like, Leanne, I just wish I had more control, like control over the situation or control over my body or control over food, right? The big one really I hear a lot is like, I wish I had more control over food, but nobody's fully in control all the time. That's thing number one. And you know, there's some things and circumstances that are not in your control, and there are some that are in your control, right? But again, unfortunately, there's a ton that aren't. And so thinking that we should be in control all the time is a losing game in itself. And so, as you've heard on this podcast before, like, you all know that I'm a big word nerd, and the etymology or the origin of words really, sticks with me. So when you look at the word control, it literally means to regulate and dominate. And so for the things that you can control, I mean, I say go get them. I'm like, yeah, go regulate and dominate the crap out of them, like work your little butt off. Put in the time and the energy, the heart and the soul into impacting and affecting and directing and dominating them. Like, that is not the part that takes away from your mood or your mojo or your happiness. But it's really like when you focus on all the things that you can't do a darn thing about, and you focus on all the things that maybe could come up or that would be out of your control, or you focus on and look for problems, that's when control really becomes a weapon against you, right? But also, like, when you do your best to control or micromanage a situation so much that it completely zaps the joy out of everything you're doing, then the need to manage or control becomes a weapon, and it actually stresses you out more than it helps you, right? So what's the alternative to trying to control everything, or trying to control yourself, control food, control your body? What if I told you that, control was a losing game, and that in reality, control isn't even what you're really looking for or what you really want? You just think you do. Like, I was told that you should just learn more control or learn more self-control, but what you really want at the end of the day is freedom, right? And if you want freedom, what you really need is learning how to influence yourself versus trying to control everything else that's not you, okay? Because again, freedom, I've talked about this before on this podcast, freedom is the opposite of control. What you really want is freedom, right? And control is the opposite of freedom. The more you try to control something, the more out of control you feel, when what you really want is influence. Like, the influence to go direct or control all the things coming in at you that you do have a say in. But then for the things that you don't have control over, go influence you. Go create influence over yourself. Work on influencing who you're being in relation to everything that's coming up for you. Work on influencing how you show up in the face of hard times or curveballs. Work on influencing the way that you handle things so that when things come up, because they will come up, you're actually proud of how you're handling. You're not reacting. You're not freaking out. You're not going off on people. You're not moving into blame, which is another thing we'll talk about. And you're not turning to food or Netflix or wine or whatever coping mechanism you use to handle stress or curveballs when they do arise. Because again, I will reiterate, they will arise. And control is only going to make things worse, because that's when what you've been doing, first of all. And if it was going to work, it would have worked right now, right? So let me just reiterate, control is the opposite of freedom. And so what you really want to do is, you don't want to think about controlling everything outside of you, controlling what you're eating, controlling everything. You want to influence you. Learn how to trust yourself again. Learn how to like yourself more. Learn how to respond with calm and ease rather than reaction, so that when any of that, like, oh my gosh, I can't see that in my crystal ball stuff comes back in and throws you off course or off kilter, you can handle it. In fact, when you learn how to influence who you're being rather than controlling everything, you're going to find that you handle it better and better each time it happens. Okay, so the fourth cause of disordered eating is restriction, okay? Restriction can be used as a tool of influence, but more often than not, it's used as a weapon of control. And so restriction literally means to make limited. And so think about this. If you have a desire or an ingrained habit, and then you go make it limited, right? Like you cut it out, but you don't feed the desire that you're taking away, that desire will still be there. It's just going unfed. So for example, if you are like eating chocolate or sugar every single day, and the common thing I hear is people saying, okay, no more sugar, and they restrict their sugar intake, what's happening is that dopamine that you're getting from the sugar, when you take it away, if you don't replace it with another form of dopamine, it's going to leave a hole in your brain, and your brain is going to backfire. You can't restrict or out-restrict, I should say, the wiring in your brain. It's going to, backfire. That's like, in another food-related example, like if you're overeating 7 days a week and then you commit to only having salad starting on Monday, there's literally going to be that hole in your brain, right, where the old habit lived. And so oftentimes, if you don't have a system to replenish your willpower, and I really do believe it's a renewable resource, you're going to eventually end up caving and reverting back to the very thing you were trying to limit or restrict in the first place. Only now it's accompanied by this voice of guilt or shame or blame or comparison, right? So what's the alternative? So think about this. What if you ditched the rules and the restriction and opted for freedom and permission, but you had structure entailed or entangled in that, like, because our brains need some sort of structure. Notice I didn't say control or restriction, but they do need a structure, like a system of thinking. But, a structure so that you had peace of mind, knowing that you're doing all that you can do to influence your life, right? Because that's the thing. People restrict because they think it's a form of control. Like it's okay, I can control this, I can restrict it. But not only does restriction not work, and it causes us to step into disordered eating, but also it's taking away your freedom. Freedom is the opposite of control. And bottom line, I'll say it again, it doesn't even work. And so what if you began with the end in mind, and you're like, okay, I know my brain needs structure, so I have to give it some sort of structure or strategy, but beginning with the end in mind, where I need to feel like I have permission and I have freedom, because that's really what your brain wants, right? So, and I get it, like most women listening don't have that paradigm, or don't even like what I'm talking about. They don't even know that this exists, or they're like, Leanne, I don't get it. I've been thinking this way my whole life. And that's exactly why we're having these conversations right now. But first comes the awareness that restriction is not a long-term strategy, right? And when you think about it, if I told you not to think about the color blue, right? Like, don't think about the color blue. Don't think about a blue ballpoint pen. Don't think about blue paint on a wall. Like, you have no choice but to think about the color blue, right? But if I told you, hey, think about the color red, think about a red paintbrush, think about a red ball, think about a red car, not once are you thinking about the color blue, right? So that's what I mean by giving your brain a different type of structure, like an alternative to that restriction that we're using, right? But keep in mind, if I tell you don't think about blue, which is kind of a form of restriction, right? Don't eat sugar, don't eat candy, don't eat anything, air quotes, bad. Your brain wants it more, it thinks about it more, and that inner rebel in you is going to try and get it more, right? So again, restriction, we talk about this in so many different ways on this podcast, but it doesn't work, and it's perpetuating this disordered eating pattern, okay? The fifth cause is persuasion. So before we get into persuasion, I actually want to talk about something that most people don't usually think of as related, but it's totally related, and that's motivation. because there are a ton of misconceptions about motivation. And it's another one I hear a lot. And people say like, Leanne, I just need more motivation. I just need to be motivated. Can you motivate me? And motivation can be a tool, but if I'm relying on it to get me through my goals, chances are I'll quickly hit that point where motivation simply isn't enough to get the job done anymore. And eventually what was once motivating, I'll now have to persuade myself or convince myself or coerce myself to continue. And when I get to that place, it takes a lot of grit and determination and white knuckling and a heck of a lot of discipline to try to stay the course. And I found this to be true of every woman I've ever worked with. But here's the other thing, activities like that, the ones that are being met with all that resistance that you're having to force or persuade yourself to do, they actually demand a ton of brain energy and just energy in general to carry out. Specifically, they actually use a lot of carbs. But if you live long enough in a lifestyle that you're persuading yourself into, you end up exhausted, right? Plus, you're going to stay in that battle upstairs in your mind, convincing yourself, which, by the way, literally means to overcome an argument, right? So do you want to constantly overcome an argument in order to get health? It doesn't. That's another thing. It's like, yeah, it sounds like it's cool in theory or like it'll work in theory, but you're now learning it doesn't, right? So what if you kept this in mind and gave yourself choices that you wanted to choose and would be easy to say yes to, where you didn't need to persuade yourself to stay the course? Because if you hate what you have to do and you're constantly needing to persuade or convince yourself, I can promise you it's not a long-term strategy. But let's also say that you do get to your ideal size or weight or hit that goal. If you hate what you have to do or who you have to be or how you have to feel to get it or keep it or stay there, you're not going to be able to sustain it. And again, that's why all these things that comprise disordered eating are not only sustainable, but they're also just not healthy. Okay, our sixth cause are guilt and shame. I did put them together. They're obviously two very different things, but they're also the same, two different things on the same continuum. And like I said, guilt and shame are two different things, but they're also very related. So guilt is when you think you did something bad or wrong, and shame is when you think you are something wrong or you are bad, and so guilt is like, okay, I ate a cookie, that was bad. And the word guilt literally means sin or crime, right? But shame, however, is I ate that cookie, therefore I am bad or I have no willpower, right? Shame is more personal. It takes the guilty crime or the thing that you did and it makes it personal. It's no longer just about the cookie, it's about the person. So the etymology of the word shame literally means the loss of reputation, right? And so guilt and shame are reactions on two different sides of the same continuum, and they share the what happened, which is like the I ate a cookie side of it. They share the data, right? They simply entail different summaries or translations of that event. And so guilt and shame, yeah, they can be powerful tools to make sure that you never stray too far from your moral compass or kind of learn how to not do something again that doesn't make you feel really good. But if you don't own them and become aware of them when they show up, they can easily become a weapon of judgment and rejection and disconnection, and weapons of guilt, weapons of shame, right? And the trick is to really just notice when guilt and shame show up and just see them for what they really are. See them for what they're trying to tell you. Let them be a tool, right? And the good news is I find with every woman I work with that guilt and shame follows patterns. And if you know the patterns to look for, you can address guilt and shame fairly quickly and fairly easily. And again, we talk about this in extent in other episodes. Bottom line is really, though, if you don't own the shame and the guilt, they will certainly own you, right? Our seventh cause is blame, right? And a lot of people mix this up with responsibility. They think oh, I'm going to hold myself accountable or I'm going to hold myself responsible. But blame it can show up in a number of ways. Whether it's pinning faults on yourself or someone else or something else, it doesn't actually change or solve anything. That's the thing about blame. It's usually like a very problem-focused reaction that doesn't change the past. It doesn't help anything. And it also keeps you focusing on the problem itself and focusing on the past, because whatever you're blaming yourself about, it already happened, right? So back to that cookie. Let's say I ate that cookie and guilt or shame creeps in, right? Or maybe my self-talk goes like, darn it, Leanne, it's all your fault. You know you're not supposed to be eating that. And maybe I blame myself, right? Or I might blame something else, or, like the cookie, right? Darn it, cookie. Why are you there? Why are you even in my house, you irresistible thing? Remember, we're not always rational, right? Or perhaps I might blame someone else. Again, not being rational, like my neighbor for baking them for me in the first place. Like thinking to myself, like, doesn't she know I'm not supposed to eat those? Like, why would she bake me cookies, right? And again, this is our thought sometimes when we're living in that disordered way of thinking. So either way, not only does blame not solve anything, but it also keeps you focusing on the problem, not a solution. Like, it's also not necessary, and it causes that resistance and angst in our brain against ourselves or against somebody else. And so here's the distinction. Like I started to say, there is a massive difference between taking radical ownership of yourself and ownership of your thoughts and your habits versus blame, okay? Blame doesn't help. Blame forces you to focus on the past. And let's face it, like, the solution right now doesn't live in the past. The solution lives right now, and it lives in the future. And so the only way to heal it and to actually take radical ownership of it is to own it with truth and with love and compassion, the data of it, but without all that blame and without all that self-condemnation, because that's just a waste of energy. So again, I'm a big advocate of taking radical ownership and responsibility, but the blame and the shame that often comes alongside it, that's the part that needs to go away. And if you really do want to become responsible, look at the situation objectively without blame, from a cause and effect perspective, and see what really happened, but without making it so personal. And so from there, you can actually go get the information that you need to create a solution for the next time this comes up. And trust me, this or something like it will come up. And so, this and all of these are what we really work on a lot in stressless eating. We talk about like how to take captive our thoughts, these big distinctions like shame, blame, and guilt. They're all kind of in the same family, right? But really learning how to manage them, because assuming that they really are going to keep coming up, they won't just magically go away. So it's like, okay, how do we deal with it, right? Bottom line though, blame is a losing game. And so you've got to own it or it will own you. Okay. So let's move on to our last three causes. Moving on to cause number 8, comparison or comparisonitis, as I usually call it. So the word compare literally means to liken or rival. Okay, so let's just nip this one in the butt, shall we? There is no one like you. There never has been, and there never will be. And there is no competition or fight or rivalry when it comes to other people, right? And if there is one, ladies, I promise you it's not real. At least it doesn't have to be, because it's in your head and it's most likely not serving you, right? They say, that old adage, that comparison is the thief of joy. And I could not believe this to be true more. Like, absolutely 1,000%. And don't get me wrong, like, comparison again can be a powerful tool to help you along the way, or it can simply be an observation that is benign and harmless. But it can easily turn someone, something, or some experience into a negative or harmful encounter if you're not aware. So for example, let's say I'm scrolling through my news feed on Facebook and I'm like, oh, look, there's pictures of my friends and family, right? Bam. Facebook is a tool of connection and companionship, or staying up to date on the lives of people that I care about. But if I'm struggling with a case of comparisonitis, bam. Now Facebook has become a weapon of judgment, self-deprecation, loneliness, isolation, or just perhaps feeling like I lack in some way, or I'm not good enough, or I'm like, why didn't they invite me, or whatever it is, right? So yeah, we are wired to make comparisons and judgments and associations, and saying not to do it is not realistic. Like, that's what our brain's wired to do. Like, I like the color red more than I like the color blue, all those things, right? But we just want to be mindful of when that comparison is being used as a weapon against ourselves and setting us up to kind of rival ourselves, as the word says, right? Because once again, we've got to own it, or else it will own us. Okay. And now we are rounding out into our last two causes of the disordered eating. All right, cause number 9 is pain, okay? People might not necessarily think, wait a minute, how is pain causing me to live in a disordered eating lifestyle, right? But it's an entire way of disordered thinking, and pain can be a powerful tool. Like, it's your nervous system. Your brain has receptors all over the inside and outside of your body to detect pain and prepare you for it and handle it appropriately. Like, that's what your senses are for, right? They keep your brain and body and heart and soul on alert when there's incoming danger or threat or stress that might cause you any pain. And so even though you are well equipped to handle it, it doesn't make it any less stressful to your body. And so talk about reactivity, right? If you're in acute or prolonged pain, whether it's mental, physical, emotional, heart, soul, you are going to be reactive, right? And that's another chicken egg cause effect of the disordered eating, right? Your nervous system would essentially be constantly telling your sensory system, I should say, would constantly be telling your nervous system to be on alert. Like, hey, locked and loaded, gotta be alert, be prepared. But that nervous system can also become a little desensitized to the pain that you're in until you are no longer even aware of it, right? So much so that you might be living with pain in areas that you aren't even aware of or akin to anymore. Areas that if you do become aware and simply take that pain away and, hey, in an optimal situation, even sprinkle on some pleasure and some joy and some happiness and peace and all those good things, your whole life could be transformed, right? And again, I want to really emphasize it's not just physical pain. Physical pain's part of it. It's a big part of it, right? But it's that, a mental, emotional distress too. So if you're committing to things that you hate or that cause you emotional distress or emotional pain about your body and your body image, it's the same nervous system reaction as physical pain, right? So keep that in mind the next time you go to commit to something that you hate or that causes you actual pain, okay? And rounding it out, cause number 10, this is a big one, perfectionism, okay? So this is another one I kind of want to blow out of the water because perfectionists often wear perfectionism like it's a badge of honor. And I'm telling you, I'm like raising my hand, calling myself out because I did this for most of my life. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't, if I don't do anything perfectly, I'm not going to do it. And I would just prided myself on being a perfectionist. But perfectionism is a weapon in disguise. Do not let it fool you, ladies, right? Perfect literally means, the etymology means to bring to full development, okay? To bring to full development. And can we all just agree that you are never doing anything to your absolute full development or potential? There's always going to be better. There's always going to be faster, easier, or a more perfect way to do something. But you know what I learned from attempting to be overly perfectionistic? It kept me from living my life, ladies. It kept me from getting off the sidelines, getting in the game, and trying stuff out. In turn, I created a habit of waiting and getting ready to get ready and planning and preparing and outlining and plotting. A lot of saying and not as much doing. A lot of wishing, but also a lot of waiting. So what if we agreed on a new definition of perfect, the real definition, that you will never be at your air quotes full development until the day that you die? So how about in the meantime, you just do your best. Keep focusing on developing yourself into the best person that is you, your best version of you, that would do it even more perfect-er, which is, again, a real word, I swear, that would do it even more perfect-er the next time, right? And because I know lifelong perfectionists don't just suddenly change overnight, let me just give you some insight that might help you. What if you gave yourself permission to just be perfect-ish? Perfect-ish, right? Like, what I really mean is, like, yeah, be particular about what really matters to you. Like, go get clear on what you really want and the things that you do want to spend more focused attention on. And by all means, spend a lot of time and attention and energy on those things. Like, go do your best. But get off the sidelines. Stop waiting for things to be perfect. Go get out there, fall down, get a bit messy, take some wrong turns, take the lessons and try again if it's something that you really want. But drop the I am a perfectionist label as a badge of honor, because it's keeping you from living your life, and it's not a label that I believe is serving you. And so from one recovering perfectionist to another, why don't you be okay with perfect-ish and just aim for your best, okay? And Don Miguel Ruiz in the book, The Four Agreements, he says it best. The fourth agreement, I think it's the fourth, one of the four, is always do your best. And he talks about how your best is going to be different when you're running 103-degree temperature with the flu versus your best when you are healthy, you're a healthy, awesome self, right? So always do your best. That's my version or invitation into perfect-ish, right? What if you're just always, okay, instead of like, am I doing it perfectly? Am I doing my best right now in any given moment, in any given day in your life? Am I doing my best right now? Okay, so let's bring this all around full circle. So have you noticed the interesting correlation with disordered eating and everything that we talked about on this podcast episode? So hopefully you're noticing that the cause of disordered eating, if I'm going to just kind of spell it out for you, it really has nothing to do with the food. Like, none of these things that we talked about were actually about like calories or fat or carbs or macros or the food itself. It's about your thinking. It's about your thoughts about food, your thoughts about your body, your thoughts about yourself. And food is just a symptom. Your relationship with food is the symptom. Your relationship with your body is the symptom. And that's why your food approach and a body approach, or taking a food and body approach, I should say, it's never going to heal this, because the problem lives in your thoughts and it lives in your brain. And in order to really address it first, and I mean this again with nothing but love, you've got to get really, really, really flippin' real about what's not working. And that is the diet mentality. That is causing the disorder. That is the prison. That is the problem. And that is that never-ending roller coaster that you, again, like you feel like you can't get off of it because you're so afraid you'll go off the deep end or gain a bunch of weight. And so I really, really want to ask you, now that we've heard everything that we talked about on this episode, do you really think another diet or quick fix or short-term food solution is going to heal this, right? Do you really want to contribute to the disorder that's already there in your relationship with food by more dieting and more diet mentality? Do you really want to continue down that road of the definition of insanity, or are you ready to get off? Because again, until you get really real about these questions, sadly, and again, statistics prove this time and time again, you're gonna stay stuck in the dieting madness. And I don't want that for you. And I hope you don't either, right? And I can promise you this, you can choose freedom, ladies. But if you're looking for somebody to give you that freedom, you're probably never going to find it. Because like we talked about, freedom will never stem from a life of control. And so if you're always living in a world of good, bad, right, wrong, all or nothing around food, or if you're always flip-flopping from one extreme to the next, like a tight leash 1 second and controlling ways and too much restriction, floating to the opposite of like no guidelines, no structure, feeling kind of like a glutton, that kind of carefree and reckless abandonment, right? If you're constantly feeling caged in by your incessant need to just be doing something, that it seems like every Monday you're in an all-out sprint to, get back on that wagon, I can tell you this, you don't have a willpower problem, and you don't have a food problem, and there's nothing wrong or broken or messed up about you, and you're not destined to stay this way the rest of your life. The real problem is a self-image problem. It's in your brain. It's in your thoughts. It's the goggles with which you're seeing yourself and your circumstances and your struggles and your habits. That is the disorder that I'm talking about. And, the biggest criminal that's stealing our freedom is, at its simplest, it's that box that we put ourselves in that contains the world of all the black, white, all, nothing, good, bad, right, wrong, should, shouldn't around food, and the world of control that inevitably stems off the back of that. And so when we step out of that box and we look towards moving in the direction of feeling the feelings that we want to feel, That's when we find our freedom. Freedom to just be. And despite what you think or what you've heard or what you've been led to believe up until this point, you can choose freedom. But first, you have to be willing to doubt everything that you think you know. You have to be willing to step outside of the box that you've put yourself in. And you have to be willing to question everything and then create your own definitions. You've got to be willing to lay down the weapons of control and restriction and punishment and persuasion and choose to find the freedom that you desperately desire. And again, that freedom will never come in this box of disordered eating, right? But again, you must change the goggles with which you're seeing yourself and your circumstances and your struggles. Like, change what you're seeing and change what you're saying, and you're going to find that the rest will magically fall into place.
Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you heard and you're interested in breaking out of your own food, body, and diet prison, here's what I want you to do next. Head on over to stresslesseating.com. That's stresslesseating.com and sign up to watch the Stressless Eating webinar, where I'll walk you through the exact 5-step game plan my female clients use to conquer emotional eating, self-sabotage, and finally heal themselves from the restrictive all-or-nothing diet mentality for good, but without obsessing or spending years in therapy to address it. I've laid it all out for you there in 5 easy steps. Remember, healing your relationship with food and your body does not happen by itself. You need expert guidance to make it happen, and we've helped clients all over the world take back their power from the food and find true and lasting freedom while enjoying life and warm chocolate chip cookies along the way. To see if we can help you do the same, head on over to stresslesseating.com. I'm Leanne Ellington, and I'll see you next time.